maybe there are other things that are scarce at the moment, but white guilt seems to be incredibly plentiful. And she's basically turned it into a gold mine. And, you know,
I mean, okay, so this book is actually not new. It's from 2018.
wow.
And it has basically been given a relaunch.
That is exploitative.
Isn't it?
Come on.
The forward is literally just a guy saying that the book is great, too.
Oh, my God.
What the fuck?
A black Princeton graduate.
Of course.
Here to tell us why the white woman talking about race is a good thing.
Bourgeoisie, you know, and you know, the cheek of this lady to make herself an authority in this way as well. Like, you know, isn't there a part where she calls, someone calls her the sheriff, the new racial sheriff, or
That's
some
in
shit?
the forward.
Wow.
Robin DiAngelo is the new racial sheriff in town.
Oh my God. This book has given me like as much hives as like when I read 12 Rules for Life.
I if I'm honest, I actually like can tolerate 12 Rules for Life a little bit more than this book.
It sounds like they're ripping like lines out of Blazing Saddles. Are you sure you're reading the right thing? Racial sheriff? Like, what the fuck?
Here's the thing, like, okay, like everyone who's woke seems to like this book, but I thought it was like the cardinal rule of wokeness that if you're like a white bitch, you can't be like, I'm the authority on racism here. This book is gonna solve racism, and I'm white, by the way. I don't understand. Like, is this not her overstepping her bounds?
Is the book useful for the capitalist class of people?
Playing devil's advocate, like just to Ashley's argument about should white people be writing this book? Like, there is an argument to be made that racism is a white problem and not necessarily something that black people.
It's one of the arguments made,
you know, right?
Actually,
so like,
although I would say that she kind of lazily quotes it from the original.
Because this goes far beyond just the sentiment of anti-racism. Like Peter said, like she's a fucking corporate diversity trainer.
I'm not vouching for this one. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, but she's a corporate diversity trainer who goes into people's workplaces and berates them and tries to dig into their psyches, and then she's
an insult comic for white
literally
people.
And it's all just a ploy so that corporations can avoid legal liability if there are racial incidents in the workplace, so they can be like, look, we hired a diversity trainer, so you can't sue us for anything.
That shouldn't happen here.
Yeah, literally.
I thought you were about to say she was an incel. I was like, what now?
If only. That would be really the icing on the cake on this.
Okay, but who do you hate more than someone with that job? Like coming into your workplace, making you do like team building exercises to prove that you don't hate black people? Like,
yeah, it's so much goofier than like. Okay, so the only person you hate more than that person is your boss. Like that's the person you hate more.
I'm sure even the boss hates.
But I'm sure a lot of them love it. Like I'm sure a lot of them, like, you know, are like, this will kind of this attaches our brand to anti-racism, number one, and it makes me not liable for any racial incidents that occur in my workplace because I paid some fucking charlatan $10,000 to come and berate my employees. And like, yeah, the clear power imbalance is what really bothers me, because your workplace is somewhere where you have to be so that you can make money to live. And if the people who are in charge of your fucking livelihood start trying to root around in your fucking psyche, that is a very precarious place to be, not to mention the sort of the way that it takes solidarity away from this already exploited class of workers as well.
What I would say is that this does seem like a book that could only come from America. And I mean that in the way.
Definitely.
I mean that in the way that there is this litigation culture of like, if there was like racial incidences in offices of corporate places or in particularly liberal scene corporations or whatever, that then there could be liable to have not been taken action to try and actively combat this sort of thing in the workplace. And then because a lot of those American corporations then have offices and most businesses is international these days. So like they've got places everywhere. So then these sorts of things get trotted out globally. So it sort of affects everywhere. Would say like, that contributes a lot to it. I think this sort of like litigation culture that America is very unique to capitalism in America than it is anywhere else, it seems. Which is quite, I don't know, I'm not sure for the reason behind that.
Yeah, but then again, there's like an entire industry that's been sort of set up around this sort of thing where, white people, largely white PMC people, are charging top dollar to go into workplaces and basically enforce racial tension and resentment, which is basically what they're doing. And I mean, I'm our roommate. I was sitting in listening to our roommate. He was on a conference call with his workplace, and they had a diversity trainer on to talk about race, and it was the worst thing I've literally ever heard in my life. They were literally there like it was like a 2-hour call, so you can't leave. They're holding you hostage. Like, you can't leave, you can't do anything. And it was literally a 2-hour long call of this white woman literally crying fucking tattoo tears, crying crocodile tears about how, we need to stand up against injustice, and you're very, and then they were all calling each other brave as well. They were like, you're so brave, so brave. The word brave was used like 1,000,000 times, and I was like, this is absolute madness. Like, this sort of faux racial awareness makes me feel and I mean, I don't work in an office anymore, but if I was working in an office as a black person, I would want to fucking kill myself. Like, it reminded me of when I was a kid. And, like, they would, in history class, they made us like watch Roots when we were learning about slavery. And like all the fucking white kids were like staring at me. They were all like looking at me. And it basically turns you into a purely racialized subject. And then everybody feels like they have to treat you like a racialized subject from then on. And it's awful. It's dehumanizing. It's dehumanizing to both white people and the minorities who are trapped in this situation.
Would you say that kids shouldn't watch Roots in school, though? Because I would say that they definitely should, but there should be an environment where they make sure that people, like, if you're, especially there's only like one black kid or whatever in the class, that that kind of behavior gets, punished, or it's like, actively discouraged.
Honestly, when it comes to confronting race, I feel like there's a difference between teaching the history of it in schools and then turning black kids into racialized subjects. And the thing is, these fucking lib teachers, these lib school teachers don't actually think about the way that their teaching may affect the black children that are in the class. They're like, look at me, I'm virtuous. I'm putting this, it puts this weird spotlight, and then everyone starts to treat you differently. They start to ask you stupid questions because kids don't have the capacity to understand the complexities. Like, I remember when we watched Roots in class, like on the playground. I was probably around maybe 10 or so. After watching Roots in class, there are kids coming up to me in the playground like, "Watcha, your name is Toby. Watcha, your name is Toby." Like, trying to reenact the scene from fucking Roots, basically. Yeah. Like, kids don't have the capacity to fully grasp and empathize. The part of their brain that deals with empathy isn't even fully developed yet. There has to be a way that you can teach this shit without fucking like making black kids feel this permanent racialized vibe. It's weird.
So would you say, like, in like a humanities lesson, maybe in like high school when you're like 16 is kind of the right time in an education state to like watch Roots? Because I think Roots is an excellent series. I think there's massive value for people to watch that, to like get a very like top level, like, history lesson.
I saw it in high school when I was 16. That was when they showed us.
That kind of seems like it's an appropriate age.
Yeah, it like at a 10-year-old, it's ridiculous to show them something like that. It's like showing them. You might as well
for bullies as well at that point, because kids are cruel fuckers.
But it even happened to me in uni, like, because first day of contextual studies, film school, we had to watch Birth of a Nation because obviously Birth of a Nation is one of Hollywood's first films or whatever.
Yeah, I had to watch that in film as well.
Like we had to watch Birth of a Nation, and this was uni age. I was probably like 20, 21 at the time. And again, everyone in class looking at me, the professor, what do you think about this, Angie? And it's like, I don't fucking...
Your professional opinion as a black, Angie, what did you think?
But it's like, yeah, literally, it's annoying because I'm like, I just want to get on with my life. Leave me alone. I don't have a fucking hot take for you. And like, you know, I feel like it's the same thing. School is mandatory. You have to be there. Work is mandatory. You have to be there. And libs are like, oh, great. We have people in a space where they can't leave and where they really don't have any power. So let's try and like, you know, bring up this really touchy subject. Let's try and sort of, you know, bring up all of the tension in this specific place where people don't actually have the power to leave. And I don't think that that's the best way to go around sort of spreading racial justice and awareness.
You know, I've been reading this book. I'm one of the things that, like, to that point specifically, it talks about complicity in racism and white supremacy. And it basically... the reason why racism persists is because people are complicit in it. Well, according to this book.
Oh my God.
And it basically, in my opinion, it bypasses the whole, especially in a workplace setting, it bypasses the whole power dynamic because you're coerced into complicity. Like complicity isn't just like an explicit choice. And the author posits it more or less like the overarching theme of this book is A, that people are never not going to be racist. So the best thing we can do is manage it. And B, all of the people who understand how to manage it need to confront racism. And what it means by confront racism, more or less from all of the story or anecdotes that it's shared, is that essentially you have to be the person at Thanksgiving that tells your racist uncle that he's the racist uncle, which, by the way, picked a brilliant like target audience, like PMC white progressives at like corporate jobs and stuff, because it's in a lot of cases it's giving them like a sort of a how to talk to blacks guide. But like the white guilt in this particular class, this very signifier, very status oriented class that isn't actually owning class, it's literally perfect because this whole time like the book is just onwards about how even the white progressives are the worst actually when it comes to race.
But it's convenient for her because this is the class that literally buys into the neoliberal logic that you can you can basically solve social issues through consumption. And that's very convenient for her as somebody who's selling a solution. And since it's this sort of pervasive problem that can never be solved, you need to constantly consume in order to show that you're trying to solve this nebulous issue that can never really be solved. So it's like wellness culture. To me, it has the same sort of tangent.
There's a term mentioned a lot of times in this book that is, I think, very related to that idea specifically. This idea of racial stamina and building racial stamina.
Oh dear God.
She also says fellow whites.
Yeah, she says my fellow whites many times during the course of this book. Nobody should ever say my fellow whites.
I wonder what's like edited out.
Not sarcastic, not genuinely. There's no reason to say that.
I wonder what's edited out after my fellow whites every time she says it. Like there's definitely, some heavy edits there for that.
Why don't she Steve Buscemi? Is she faking her whiteness or what?
Yeah. Fellow white homies.
That's some fucking weird. It's just such a weird way of like talking about it as well. Like, I don't know.
I want to know how much racial stamina you have to build in order to join Sea Org.